Good afternoon to all of those in North America. Good morning to all of you in Asia, particularly East Asia, and a very late good evening to those in Europe that have been able to join us. It seems that at least members and curious folks from at least 8 or so countries have joined us for today's exciting session on AI trends. I'm excited. I think we're going to cover a lot of very interesting topical considerations around AI. And I'll start by reminding you, if you haven't seen it already, a very remarkable quote from a calm, thoughtful leader, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, who's not known for making off-the-cuff silly comments, but he characterized AI as being so important that it will be ultimately even more impactful to society than fire or electricity. Now, that's a huge statement, and whether he's right or wrong doesn't really matter. The point is, AI will have significant, magnificent impact if governed and thought through and ultimately deployed correctly. In fact, anywhere where data and coding come together, we have the opportunity, the possibility, if you will, of bringing some intelligence, some cognition, to and ultimately providing deeper insights, better outcomes. AI is already ubiquitous in our society. If I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but almost anything you're doing on the phone these days is tapping into some enablement from AI in the background. We, of course, are spending lots of time thinking about self-driving cars and all the AI interesting connotations that need to be thought through and developed for that particular solution. Military applications, I could go on and on and on. I am excited today because we have a fantastic panel. They represent 3 of the countries across Asia Pacific. For starters, all of you know that Asia Pacific is just massive, complex, and highly diverse as a region. There's no way we could cover AI trends in all countries, so we've limited our discussion here to China, India, and Japan. But indeed, AI is the kind of topic where there is so much innovation, so much happening at such an amazing speed that really trends is almost needs to be a global discussion. Nevertheless, we'll try to bring some discipline and some referencing back to at least those 3 Asian countries. Now, our panelists as well represent 3 fantastically different functional perspectives to AI. We have a very talented, award-winning science fiction author who is coming at it from a very creative viewpoint. We have a globally renowned researcher who is really thinking through and supporting with evidentiary data what can be done with AI, what pitfalls might we need to avoid. And then we have a very practical business perspective with the managing partner of a venture capital firm who is trying to turn AI into ultimately practical, financially sustainable solutions that society can obviously benefit from. I'm excited. I hope you are too. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel to you. In no particular order, I'll start with Chen Quifan, who is also known as Stanley. Stanley is an award-winning Chinese speculative fiction author. He's a translator, creative producer, a curator as well. He's the honorary president of the Chinese Science Fiction Writers Association. He also has a seat on the X Prize Foundation Science Fiction Advisory Council, published extensively a novel called Waste Tide. But perhaps the greatest book I've come across that I highly recommend to our audience today is AI 2041, 10 Visions for Our Future. He has co-authored that remarkable book with the legendary AI scientist, Dr. Kai-Fu Lee. It extrapolates what the future might look like 20 years from now based on current AI technology. So no wild new inventions needed, just what life will start to look like as we all start to process meaningfully how we're going to live and successfully utilize AI. So welcome to you, Stanley.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you too. Dr. Yuko Harayama, next. She is the executive director for RIKEN. This is a very distinguished 105-year-old research institute based in Tokyo, focused on technology and science. Yuko has a remarkable background. Prior to RIKEN, she spent 5 years with the Cabinet Office in Japan as an executive member of the Council for Science, Technology, and Innovation. 2 years at the legendary OECD as the Deputy Director for the Directorate itself on Science, Technology, and Industry, 10 years at the Graduate School of Engineering at Tohoku University. For those of you who don't know, Tohoku is sometimes referred to as the MIT of Japan. She has a number of doctorates, a PhD in education, a PhD in economics, both from the University of Geneva. And she's even been an award winner of the Légion d'honneur récipient, the Chevalier Award. So we welcome her. Thank you, Yuko, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today.
Excellent. Last and certainly not least is Ankur Jain, an old friend and the founding partner of Emergent Ventures, a very disciplined, early stage, AI-focused venture capital firm that has developed a fascinating business model where it's incubating organizations both in the US and India in a highly collaborative way. Ankur has a robust background in engineering, having worked with a prior venture capital firm, Bloomberg, very Israeli-focused, has a remarkable engineering background that included leading product teams at Cisco for many years. He holds, after getting some education in India, he holds a master's in computer science from UCLA, an MBA from the Wharton School. He's co-invented a number of technologies, half a dozen or so, and wonderfully has shared a lot of his thinking on investments, technology, and personal consciousness and evolution on TEDx and other forums. I'm a particular fan of his, of what he has shared publicly with us around quote unquote, inner engineering, the process by which you can bring calm, strength, focus to ultimately help you better realize your potential as a person, both for what you want to contribute to life and your organizations that you might be a part of. So Ankur, a big welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
Indeed. Thank you all panelists. We're going to take on 3 topics today. AI obviously could be at best divided into at least a dozen, and those are deeply aggregated already. So we can't take it all on. But first and foremost, let's talk for a few minutes around. Oh, by the way, I'm going to interrupt myself. For those not familiar with the Asia Society Zoom events, but hopefully somewhat familiar with Zoom in general, there is a chat function that you can find in your upper right corner of your screen. By all means, submit any questions. We sometimes are inundated with way too many. If so, we'll try to aggregate them thematically and hear from our panelists to hear what's on your mind. All right, so topic 1, let's just discuss trending in general. Panelists, I just want to ask you a very simple question. As we roll a little bit deeper into the year 2022, what important AI trend should our audience be aware of right now that's either emerging or really gaining significant steam? Anybody like to go first when you think of the country you're representing on this call? Stanley, perhaps a thought or two on what AI trend needs to be appreciated for China?
First, thanks for having me here. Have this great opportunity and pleasure to share with all of you from Asia Society. So I think the biggest trend I can see for now in China is the regulation and law enforcement. As you might know or not know, last July, Shenzhen, so referred to China's Silicon Valley. So it released a plan to regulate and support the development of its AI industry, make it the first local government in China to establish target policies for the sector. So, and meanwhile, because Shenzhen's leadership in AI, so the city's policies affecting the sector might prove influential in setting standards across the rest of China. So also in last October, China passed the final version of the Personal Information Protection Law, which will regulate the use and management of personal data. So PIPL is China's first comprehensive regulation of the protection of personal information, and it's modeled after the Europe GDPR. So you might see this big trend is gonna be across the country in this year or maybe the couple of years ahead. So I think this big trend has to be very cautious and look into from a even more profound way. So definitely leading the future.
Thank
you.
That's my absolutely fascinating observation. Yuko, how about Japan?
Thank you. Based on our experience of these last 2 years, we see not only we are talking about the potential of AI, but mostly AI in use, in practical use. And in particular, to address the challenge from the COVID-19, to have a better understanding of the nature of SARS-CoV-2, also to analyze the effects and the impact of COVID-19 through simulation of COVID-19 droplets and the aerosol, and simulation of infection spread, and also to support political decision-making by providing the result of these simulation and forecasting a number of new infections. So this is within the framework with general term of digital transformation, DX. But we see also the caveat in some sense, difficulty to have data gathering because of institutional barrier. We also see the gap between local and central governments, institutional barrier, and also data sets exist. We have data, but we do have the problem of interoperability and so on. So that's the reality today.
Fascinating, Yuko. Yeah, the challenge around data governance, classification, ownership, hygiene, et cetera, is formidable. And obviously, AI can only be as good as the data it's ultimately leveraging per its training and whatnot. Ankur, over to you. How about India? What do you think is the most important trend our audience should be aware of for 2022?
India has had a strong IT services industry for about 30 years, serving global markets. And what's happening is India is often a base which is doing a lot of the underlying data management, AI work for US companies. So what we're seeing is and traditionally the models were around using IT services companies, the big Infosys and the Wipro, and they were working with a lot of enterprise clients and providing those services. And now in the last few years, we're seeing a spike in innovation coming out of India for the global market, especially in the form of startups. Many people may not know this, but if you look at the B2B software startups in the US, 20% of all unicorns in the US right now are building product out of India. These companies, if you go to the website, they look like any other US company. They're headquartered in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. CEO is here, sales and marketing is here. But if you double click under the hood, 70% of the team is actually sitting in India. And so we're seeing a lot of the behind the scenes work, the data science teams, product development, annotation, labeling, a lot of that. So it is assembling right now a very high quality sort of workforce which is trained in AI. I'm involved also with a AI training school based out of India. And their projection is in a few years, it'll have the largest data science workforce in the world because of people are seeing that as the next career serving global markets. So yeah, I would say it's going to be a factory for AI work globally, potentially.
Oh, that's remarkable, Ankur. Yeah, I've shared with many. I think it's just not reported at all or appreciated by a global audience, but especially in India and the US. But the codependence on AI's future between India and US is absolutely formidable. I think we are much more deeply linked than most people appreciate. You citing the 20% statistic of use of India amongst the unicorns, those are our biggest technology firms, $1 billion and up typically, is one for everybody to appreciate. Thank you, Ankur. Panelists, we've also got, of course, generally speaking, an underappreciation for where AI is already in our lives. If you just think for a second about all the AI that's emerged the last couple of years alone, what should we be aware of? What AI in your three countries, or even just globally, is underappreciated? What would you like to bring to everybody's attention?
I can start. So, given the work we do, we have a portfolio of about 40 companies, and a lot of them are applying AI in different fields, sales, marketing, HR, operations, supply chain, call centers. And a lot of the work we do is about, most of what they do is this is underappreciated. So because we primarily invest in B2B companies, so a lot of the AI is happening behind the scenes without people being aware of. For example, we have a company called Observe.ai. It's a voice AI solution for call centers. So today, all these call centers, they have a quality assurance team. They manually listen to about 2% of the calls, and then they fill out an assessment of what happened for quality assurance purposes. What the new technology does is it uses AI to bring automation to this whole quality process. So instead of 2%, now you do QA to all 100% calls, and you do a much better job of that QA. And what we're seeing now in the next evolution, which just recently got launched, is when an agent is answering the call in real time, they'll be guided by AI to answer the call better. So for example, let's say you get stranded and you're calling roadside assistance for an insurance company. And you ask, the agent asks you, where are you located? What's your insurance policy number? Cross street. The AI is checking, are you asking all the right questions? If you forgot to ask something, it'll remind you, hey, you forgot to ask something. And so a lot of what we're seeing, it's AI is increasingly playing a role in those little things. Every time you interact with the business, there's something happening on the other side which is being powered by AI without us knowing it.
Excellent. Yeah, lots of use cases that are happening right in front of us, but we just weren't aware. Fascinating. Stanley, Yuko, anything else that you'd like to share for underappreciated AI solutions?
If I may.
Yeah, please.
I will start. The fact is that AI is already present almost everywhere in our everyday life, but not directly visible. So something that you can touch yourself. So therefore, it's no way to appreciate it consciously. So we know that AI is behind your smartphone and so on. So, but I would say most people fear of is kind of the loss of human touch. Its impact on the human-to-human interactions. And this is in particular when you talk about the workplace, fear of automation and just cool, but efficiency, but no human touch. But because it's unexperienced, unknown, and yes, so many different discourse, exciting, but fear. So it's difficult to assess in kind of an objective manner for a single citizen. That's something that's underlying feeling of ordinary people. And we have to overcome with this, bringing more evidences and more showing them, and then to be conscious that we have negative impact, but at the same time, we have to balance both.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic point, Yuko. And we'll speak a little bit later in the session, of course, to AI adoption generally and how it is that we can overcome our fears and better understand and ultimately better interact, I suppose, with AI capabilities. So thank you for raising that critical point. Stanley, your thoughts?
Yeah, so with like Ankur and Yuko talk a little bit about from the application perspective. So I want to talk about the methodology of imply AI. So right now we're talking about machine learning, right, every day, but actually it's just one of the paths towards realized AI. So there are so many other ways, but it's still under developing. But maybe in the future there'll be something leading more less heavily on data, which might more naturally functioning as human beings. So I might think right now there's several maybe other ways like genetic programming and maybe like some other stuff like there is out there, but it's beyond our vision. So, but a lot of like scientists and engineering, they're doing their stuff, try to make our AI more accessible and more robust, but less rely on a huge amount of data. So I think those parts might be sounds like science fiction right now, but it definitely open up new possibilities of AI in the future.
Outstanding point, Stanley. Yeah, I think pervasively we all think of AI as being one side of a coin, the other being data richness, data heaviness. Without data, you don't get anywhere. But you're right to introduce that. And you've really provided an excellent segue to my final question on the trending in general here, our first topic. And that is, panelists, to ask of you, imagine just 3 to 5 years from now, so nothing too far out, but something that we'll be able to see early signs of. What AI solutions, or indeed AI problems, should we expect to emerge in the next 3 to 5 years, the near future, not the current state? Ankur, perhaps I'll turn to you. You're obviously hopeful that some of your early stage firms will blossom and we'll see their solutions a little bit more clearly in the future.
Well, often I deal with the more mundane things because I deal with things which are more near to market,
Right.
maybe not as exciting as self-driving planes or things of that nature. But I'm sure today people are frustrated when they try to chat with these automated agents. They don't understand what they're doing, or they talk to someone on the phone. I would say in 3 to 5 years, those products will get probably 5 times better. Those automated agents will hopefully solve 80% of your problems, and your agents, those voice agents, will solve 80% of your problems. Maybe not 80%, maybe 50%, but I think we're getting there. That's what we're seeing. Yeah.
Well, we'll take any improvement. Those chatbots are obnoxious on occasion. I'm sure most in our audience would agree, especially when you have to repeat yourself. Thank you, Ankur. Great comment. Yuko, when you think of the near future, 3 to 5 years from now, what might we expect to see? And by all means, tie it back to Japan.
Near future in Japan, I would say the most pressing challenge in Japan is the problem of the fact of aging society. And hopefully, unexpectedly, we have the problem. We have to deal with the lack of caregivers, because the pyramid of population is that we have less and less young people, and we need to have much more elderly to take care of. So how to balance this is probably technological solution, and AI will be behind. And also, we may think about improvements of the quality of services for elderly. It could be more personalized and less invasive and respecting the dignity of people. That could be something that we can explore with the AI application. And also, we can ensure the quality of life of elderly. And for example, offering secure mobility, not just automated, but secure mobility, ensuring that they can go outside and enjoy to see outside and exchanging with the people. And also, we may think about respecting their autonomy in the way that there be really environments allowing to them to feel comfortable with themselves. But at the same time, I see some kind of caveat, because it's may lead to kind of embedded surveillance system, in the way that we have to think about how to balance respect of privacy and having a careful eye, to not say surveillance. That's all something that we have to think of. But we see potential, and huge potential, using AI in this domain. And it's not science fiction, but it's coming in quite few, 3 to 5 years.
Indeed, coming soon, Yuko. 3 to 5 is around the corner. Thank you all. And we'll be cheering for you, Yuko, on Japan finding solutions. We have, as you know well, many societies that are aging where the pyramid is inverted or at least challenged. And we're going to be dependent increasingly on a smaller and smaller base of younger workforces and younger people. So outstanding. Thank you. A number of questions have come in. We're definitely monitoring them. I thank everybody in the audience for them. I'm going to wait to a little bit before we turn to them because I suspect some I'm going to need to aggregate thematically. Let me, meanwhile, pivot to our second topic, and that is one that will sound a little wonky, a little technical, but it's actually very practical and very important in the end. And that's the topic of AI governance. And a closely adjacent separate AI topic, AI ethics. AI governance, for those not familiar with the term, is really an oversight initiative that's tasked to essentially ensure that policies, controls, and I mean internal controls, ownership and accountability and the like are both well-defined and, just as importantly, are followed. Several governments have been getting very active in this field in publishing and announcing their principles and indeed in some cases even frameworks. China, for example, has published 6 key policies and pronouncements in the last half of 2021. Stanley cited one of them. India's think tank, the Niti Aayog, published in early 21 some principles on AI governance. Japan's legendary METI government agency updated its AI governance release just a couple of weeks ago. Everybody's jumping in with some guidance, some limitations, or attempting at least to set up some limitations, and very importantly, some critical governance considerations. Panelists, I'm going to ask of you, what pitfalls and challenges might we see countries make in this very complex, even nuanced topic of AI governance? Where do we see good things happening? Where do we see challenges coming up this year and in the near future? Yuko, perhaps I'll turn to you to speak first on this.
Thank you. Thank you to mentioning METI's updated release of this guidance. I just start with this because why we need to have this kind of governance guidelines, because we are promoting AI at the government level in view of more productivity, more efficiency, and so on. But even on the discourse of companies, they say we'll be using AI, implementing, exploring AI, but action is not accompanying these discourses because companies are some kind of reluctant to explore and integrate AI in their businesses because of the kind of lack of clear governance framework, because they want to have within a safe space. And if you are moving to unknown, you may have difficulty or some problems. And then that's why they are looking after this kind of governance guideline provided by the government. This is the framework. And also that is new for this discourse. It's not, they have prepared this guideline, not legally binding, and also they promise to be living documents. That means it could be reviewed regularly and adapting to the evolving environment. That is quite new for Japanese government because when you have your regulation, it's regulation. And it is fixed for several years. But this time it's different. And the idea is really aiming to accompany companies developing and operating AI systems using AI systems. So it's kind of safeguard and reducing gray zone and also reducing institutional uncertainty. So with this, I think the companies feel more comfortable to move this unknown phase. And also we see K-Balance, association of big companies, also they are advocating for AI implementation and they have their own strategy. I think with this, we have framework to push development of AI in the right direction. This is the context. But basically, basic principle for Japanese context is that we put emphasis on the human-centered approach, first of all, and also education, and we need to train people. And also we are keen about privacy protections and also security and the fair competitions and the fairness, accountability, and transparency and innovation. Almost all principle, as I think is common, not only for part of Japan, but in Japan, we try to put human at the center.
Thank you, Yuko. We've had a submitted question that is a perfect follow-up for you, and certainly panelists, if you have a view, I'd like to hear from you as well. Digital inclusion is something that I think all governments are trying to do for their citizenries, certainly in the three countries that we're focused on here. However, that's easier said than done, right? There are segments of society where that digital inclusion is a big challenge. And so where AI may not necessarily be effectively trained from a bias perspective, and such that the AI solutions don't serve all of society. I hope I'm paraphrasing Sudipto's question fairly. Any thoughts or comments on how the AI governance frameworks that nations are proposing, whether they're static or living, as you shared, Yuko, can be thoughtfully addressing the fact that all of society needs to benefit from this?
I think today we see the development of interfaces facilitating the use of AI or digital tools, and that's something that we have to take on. And also, we can see some kind of mutual learning process within young generation and elderly, supporting each other. We see this in the vaccine for COVID-19. We have to register to be vaccinated through using smartphone. But for elderly, it's complicated. No way to do themselves. So we see the emergence of NPO or social movements by young generation, helping elderly to accompany this. This kind of practice could be generated. And I think it's not only from the top down, from the government inducing something, but we can see coming from the ground and more bottom-up approach is needed to have realization of more inclusiveness within digital society.
Great, thank you, Yuko. Ankur, Stanley, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think because China is doing AI governance experiments in I think it's 18 different areas like countryside and small towns. So because as Yuko mentioned, there are so many diverse and the population, the country size is huge in China. So I think the biggest challenge is not the infrastructure or the technology, but the people, the mindset of the local governments. So they have to shift their mindset toward a new technology like AI-driven governance. And I think not only the top-down policy and law enforcement, but in the future, they need some bottom-up, pretty much adjust and adapt it to the local situations. So maybe there's all this data is local, and all this kind of algorithm might be evolve and adjust to the local situation as well. So, and also I think we need more tools and interfaces to help people to be more comprehensible, accessible to all this kind of information, because right now we're all being very cautious and concerned about the data privacy and transparency, and also how we can increasingly develop the explainability of AI that's something pretty much not ready yet. So unless we can solve all these kind of concerns of the people, I don't think we should push AI government too fast, because like we need to put people in the center, as Yuko put it.
Yeah.
One thing I would also add is that data need not be perfect, and it need not have everything. As systems evolve, they correct. So I'll give an example. Let's take the insurance industry. Insurance industry companies are trying to use the data to price insurance for different segments. Now, one company may not have the perfect all-inclusive data about each and every, and they'll get it right for a few people. For a few people, they may overprice or underprice the insurance. But then another company picks up the gap where this company is not doing it right and prices it better for a different segment. And so you have a market, we have a number of insurance companies, and they all cater to certain segments. And then as a whole, industry whole, they're able to relatively price it well for across the space. I expect the same to happen here. Maybe there's one initiative or one project or one company that the AI models are not perfect, but they work for a certain segment, not as well for other segments. But then somebody else creates the right model or the right data set for something else. And then as an industry, if there are inefficiencies or gaps, somebody will typically come to fill it. And so you'll get hopefully a robust representation across the space. Right.
Thank you, Ankur. Thank you all. So one explicit question we've gotten on AI governance is, of course, that it's very difficult to weed out embedded bias, explainability, as you referenced, Stanley, the challenge around that, quantifying uncertainty, for example. What perspectives do any of you have that you'd like to share on how AI is still failing us by and large?
I can start. So I think a lot depends on the problem. And let's take two different problems. Let's take advertising. You're seeing a lot of online ads. They have a lot of AI data algorithms in the back. In this case, most people are not expecting a lot of explainability. Okay, you see an ad, even if you see the wrong ad, most people don't care. But if it's insurance, governments care. They have put rules around how you can price insurance, so that it's not discriminatory and different things. And those models have to be very explainable. Look, in the US, for every state, regulators expect you to explain those models and what's driving that. And in AI, we're seeing a full spectrum of techniques. Some are focused around that. They'll have a lot more explainability. And for problems that society cares about, explainability, it will be solved using those frameworks. There could be other problems which people don't care as much, and they'll be solved using which the focus is just optimization. So I think they'll have different techniques and frameworks to solve different problems depending on what society demands from those problems.
That makes sense, Ankur. Put another way, perhaps, the priority, the criticality of what AI is attempting to produce and its outcome will really drive just how much AI governance is warranted, is how I heard it. We don't need to have such a robust methodology if it's just a small little transactional issue of some kind. The phrase, quote, trustworthy AI, quote, is used a lot these days in AI conferences, inside of organizations, certainly government agencies thinking about AI governance. A lot of the frameworks I've seen behind trustworthy AI and how to get there are very impressive. There's a lot of discipline, robust methodologies, et cetera. But there's a fundamental problem. These AI, trustworthy AI is often very dependent on either preventative front end or mitigation tools, access controls on the front end, testing systems for bias on the back end, et cetera. There's a very fundamental problem that with AI code self-evolving, if you will, AI in a black box, where developers can't understand the code at some point in the code's evolution, nor, of course, be able to back out changes. There's a very fundamental question that still remains, regardless of catchy phrases like trustworthy AI, and that is, can we really, truly, fully trust AI? And there'll be some use cases, to Ankur's point earlier, that are very important to all of us that we have to get right. But if we've got this black box phenomena, we don't understand the code, all the robust frameworks in the world can get us kind of there, but do they get us fully there in trusting AI? I wonder if any of the three of you have some thoughts you'd like to share here.
If I may.
Please, Yuko.
I would say we can have an approach to the problem caused by technology to respond with technology. And it may apply to the black box problem here of AI. And the effort to create explainable AI we observe today anywhere could be considered as an illustration of this approach. And also I would say trustworthy AI doesn't mean necessarily to have the trust in all AI outcome. Trustworthy AI concern more about the process rather than outcomes, since AI outcome depends on the choice of data sets and other factors, many other factors. And also I would say finally, the final decision to trust AI outcome or not belong to human, not to AI.
Okay, thank you for that perspective. So it's more relative than maybe most of us have appreciated, but your caution, what you're suggesting is it's humans that need the trust, and we shouldn't be fully vested in trusting AI itself. We just need to simply depend on robust processes as best we can. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Great. Well, it's a difficult problem. I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the coming years as AI advances in indeed solving very large, complex problems that have possibly even impacts on our lives. That's a good segue in my mind to an adjacent challenge in the AI governance world, where AI governance, per its responsibility and accountability mandate, spills over a little into the world of AI ethics. The trolley problem has been widely discussed as a classic illustrative AI ethical problem. And I mean, by trolley, I mean trains. The trolley problem is, for those not familiar with it, which might be many here in our audience, is very simply summarized this way. A trolley, a train, is coming down the train tracks, and it's almost going to certainly be killing 5 people who are tied to those train tracks, so very dramatic. An AI program has the ability to switch the train immediately over with a rail yard lever to divert the train onto another set of tracks. But on that other set of tracks, we've got one person who is going to almost certainly be killed as well. So what is the right solution for that AI program? AI clearly is not introspective like humans. It can't make a moral decision. I think we'd all agree with that. But AI can be trained to have preferences. So fundamentally, panelists, we have to think about what's the right approach to AI for this type of ethical challenge. And for anyone in the audience wondering, geez, is this really a practical problem? It is. It's being debated hotly around the AI coding challenges for self-driving cars, where we might face something almost exactly like the trolley problem. Anybody care to share an initial thought on how to approach a classic moral philosophical conundrum like this?
Right, I can take that firstly. I think in the book AI 2041, we actually tap into several of these morality questions about AI. In the Holy Driver, we talk about autonomous vehicle. In Quantum Genocide, we talk about autonomous weapon in the future. So I think for now, I think AI doesn't have the accountability to make all this kind of so-called moral decisions, because morality is kind of complex and sometimes lie in very blurred area and so hard to be quantified, because it's distinguished by historical and cultural context even by different individual and scenarios. So even for human beings, sometimes we are so difficult to make the moral decisions as well. But I think in the future, like algorithm, which AI like leverage to make all this kind of decision, we have to like somehow keep humanity in the loop. So we have to make all this kind of incalculable factors calculatable. So which means we need more perspective, not only from scientific engineering perspectives, areas, experts, but also we need some anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists perspectives as well. So I think that's the only way we can have AI to understand and solve all these kind of moral decisions.
Oh, that's a fantastic, very expansive answer, Stanley. Thank you. Yeah, a broad-based, multidisciplinary approach may indeed serve us well. Very practically, of course, with these types of moral dilemmas, there's ultimately the issue of accountability. In the trolley problem, or imagine Tesla having a similar one with its self-driving cars, where does accountability lie for either the one person who dies on the train tracks or the 5 on the other train tracks? What do we do when AI code is open sourced and ownership isn't even easily attributable? I mean, these are very, very tough problems. I'm wondering, Yuko and Ankur, if you've got a thought or two here.
Yeah, I'm following Stanley's perspective. I would say introduction of AI forces us to question the core value of our society, something that usually we take for granted. But I think it's a healthy process. And in this sense, the capacity of human is tested by AI, not just we are testing AI, but AI raises the question that we have to pose ourselves. And probably it may lead to a better keep society, better structure, value system, and improve our capacity to have moral value here. And in this perspective, I would say human-centered value and fairness, one of the OECD AI principle, reveals all its significance here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yuko. Ankur, any thoughts, or shall I pivot over to our third topic?
Yeah, I would say knowing how systems and organizations and governments work, I expect situations like that, it'll be a long time before they get automated decision making. Those will stay in the purview, and which is why things, when you talk about fully automated driving, I think they're much further out than most people think because of these corner situations, which many people may not get comfort with. And then the regulation will keep until those things are sorted out. So you'll have the question that when those things happen, they would expect a human to be there to make those decisions, and they not be, unless there's a very clear guideline or rule that they can create. So I think we'll see a spectrum of things which don't present those dilemmas. You'll see very fast AI deployment and evolution there. Things which are moral dilemmas, I think we may take a very long time because of these reasons to be sorted out.
Sounds good, Ankur, and let's certainly hope so. Audience, thank you very much for the wonderful questions that are coming in. Several of them merit a full hour of attention, so forgive me if we don't get to your questions. I'm trying to bake them into my own here so that at least they're partially answered. A couple of them relate really to the next topic, our final topic, and I'm mindful of the time here, and that's around AI adoption. AI adoption in our organizations, our schools, our companies, government agencies, our beloved nonprofit organizations. We've all read about the fears of future job loss per automation, intelligent automation, AI-enabled automation. There have been, alongside those fears, a rebuttal, very impressive in many cases, where there is strong argumentation that no, we're just abandoning old technologies that allow us to work less manually, less boringly, if you will, and allow humans to get to more meaningful roles within their companies. Nevertheless, despite some good responses to that argument, a lot of people are scared about the broader macro trend of automation. Yuko, let me start with you. You've done a lot of research around AI adoption. What is the right fundamental way to think of how organizations should even approach AI and effectively adopt it?
What we observe, there's a huge gap between what is expected, predicted, or promised, and the reality. It's still limited, but AI is already introduced and adopted in the workplace. And what we need is really to observe what's happening, make kind of reality check in order to adjust the use of AI to prevent the misuse and to improve the quality of the workplace. That's the ultimate goal. And I think the solution is not to exclude AI from the workplace, but to use it intelligently. Friendly. And I would say here again, the capacity of human is tested by AI.
Okay, great. Ankur, Stanley, any thoughts here around AI adoption?
I see AI continuing forward the journey of automation. And I don't, we've been on this journey for hundreds of years. With the Industrial Revolution, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we started, putting computers in everywhere. 25 years ago, it was the birth of the internet. So many industries have changed. I mean, I don't know the last time people went to a travel agent office and, try to book a ticket. But so I see that's a constant evolution of job roles. Some roles change, some morph, some go away. And what was true 20 years ago is still true today. That people who want to stay on top, they'll have to be ready for change. They have to constantly train themselves, retrain themselves. And that's true with AI. AI is fundamentally just about using data more intelligently, and could be a number of different techniques, but fundamentally it's about unlocking the power of data, and that will definitely keep happening for a long time.
Excellent, thank you. Stanley, anything you want to share?
In our story, Job Savior, in the book AI 2041, we imagine in the future, we're actually using AI as a tool to help people to retrain and do the job reallocation, because we think there's something fundamentally changed in the job market, happened before and will definitely happen in the very near future. So I think the most important thing is we have to bear in mind job is not only meant to be like making money, like have income and salaries, etc., but also means dignity, self-esteem, and also the purpose of living. So I think the more important way how we gonna find people the new purpose, meaningful living style. So maybe not doing a real job, maybe a virtual job, maybe just like playing video games like nowadays kids. But we have to make people feel they are like self-esteem, and also they pretty much make a lot of sense when they're doing their jobs, no matter what kind of job that is. So I think AI definitely can play a very important role to make the transaction smoothly as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Stanley. That's a very typical humanistic, broad answer. I appreciate that, and one that you've captured well in your short story within AI 2041. We have just a few remaining minutes, and so I want to try to get to some of the questions that have been submitted. Some are very technical, legal considerations, how to audit, things like that. They're all good and all highly relevant. So my apologies, audience members, if we don't address yours. One question that came in early that's top of mind for many is this media reporting about the quote unquote war on AI, where really it's a race of innovation and technology. How would you characterize the progress AI is undertaking in China, India, and Japan, perhaps relative to the US or whatever you'd like to benchmark against? Is there any way where AI development can be a little bit more cooperative and it's less of a race, so to speak? I wonder if anyone has some thoughts they'd like to share.
Right. I think there's one common challenges ahead of us, like all the human beings across geopolitics, ideology, boundaries, is climate change. So I think on this problem, we definitely need to collaborate, no matter using AI. Of course, AI is the most powerful tool we can leverage in hand to fight against the climate change and environmental problem. But we need to working together, because there's so many different diversities out there, and even across species, across countries, and across culture for sure. So I think, I have this kind of high hope in mind, but all I can do is using science fiction or speculative fiction to build up this kind of consensus with storytelling. So I hope it will become some reality in the future.
Outstanding. Great. Ankur, Yuko, any thoughts as we move to wrap up?
I'm continuing in line with Stanley said. We see in the competition of innovation, race for new technologies, we see more and more interference of geopolitical dimension, not only from the technological point of view, innovation point of view, but additional factor is there. And it could be possibly kind of a barrier to have a collaborative, community of engineers. By definition, they are collaborative because they are challenging to advance technology to be useful for society. So collaboration. But it may have external factor coming in to make not really fully exploring this sense of community. That's something that we have to take care of. And I think we need to express voices from engineers, from researchers, from those who are developing, that we need this space for collaboration beyond these factors.
Thank you very much, Yuko. That's a terrific, globally centric answer. Ankur, any final thoughts before I wrap up?
Yeah, I would say that, there is much being written and spoken about AI. Whenever there's something new, it's easy to project out your imagination, and everything wild thing is possible in your imagination. But often those imaginations focus on things which are, fearful, or I would say there's nothing. It is one more step in the series of, our automation revolution. We have to embrace it. We have to, just like every other innovation we have embraced. It comes with some challenges, but it'll take time. Something will happen quickly. But rather than treating it as a black box, people have to. I think somebody had a question of how can I be more AI ready? Should all of us learn Python and programming? I think for some people that is probably the right choice. For others, in what you do, it's about just being in touch with how some of these tools and technologies are affecting what they do, and just keeping themselves agile in being good learners, and not thinking that it's too late for me to learn. There's always time for you to learn, and there's always be the right framework for every age, every segment, to learn and imbibe the newest innovation and framework in what they do. As long as they do that, I feel it'll be something that will help all of us.
Oh, that's a very encouraging a line of thought, Ankur. Thank you very much. And indeed, thank you to all our panelists, Chen Quifan, aka Stanley Chan, Dr. Yuko Harayama, Ankur Jain. We really appreciate the time you've given to our Asia Society audience today, this morning, tonight, wherever you may be. Audience members, thank you for your participation and making an hour of time. My apologies if we didn't get to your question. Hopefully we got to it in part at least. I wish you all a wonderful day and a wonderful evening. Stay safe. Thank you very much for joining.